All right, so Nick is a Virginia delegate, which you probably know, which I'm in Virginia, so yay, Virginia. All right, so I'm going to name off a few things you might not have known about him. He actually lives in Culpeper County, which is like an hour away from here, which is awesome. He joined the Army and served with the 82nd Airborne Division and the 25th Light Infantry Division as an infantryman. And then after September 11th, he volunteered for U.S. Army Special Forces Green Berets, and eventually served 2 tours in Iraq. So give him a big round of applause. Nick was honorably discharged in 2009, and he moved his family to Virginia, and in 2015 decided to, thankfully, get involved with the Virginia House of Delegates. And so if you guys know anything about Nick, is that he's fearless, he's ready to take on anything in the government. I actually did a podcast recording with him recently, and we got talking about raw milk and why can't you sell your food and all of that stuff. So Nick is your advocate in the government, and so he's here today to talk to you about how you can get involved, how you can make changes in your local government and beyond. And so we're super happy to have Nick with us. Give him a round of applause.
All right, so I got asked as I was walking up there, like, do you ever put the coffee mug down? There you go. All right. I'm just kidding. No. All right, so listen, first of all, thank you very much to Amy, to Homesteaders of America, all of you for being here. I know there was a little bit, I heard some people expressing that there might have been some concern to be in an event today based off of some of the things that have been happening in other parts of the world. And I remember looking at someone, I'm like, this is quite literally the safest place you could be anywhere in the country right now. So Amy gave you a little bit of my background. I'll talk a little bit about the work that I do in the General Assembly, some of the work that we've attempted to do with respect to food freedom, things like raw milk, some of the people that we've worked with, and some of the problems and the difficulties, and why is this so hard to get through the minds of legislators. And so I'm going to start off with a story, and I need you to all understand something, right? Like, I love this community. I can't even tell you how much I love this community. I go down to the General Assembly, and sometimes my faith in humanity takes a huge dip. And then I come to this conference, and I'm completely rejuvenated because I'm always around people that, even if we don't agree on every single thing, there's this degree of like-mindedness. And one of the things I've always told people that are not familiar with the homesteading community is the thing that really attracted me to it is that I have never seen so many people that absolutely want their neighbor to succeed. Right, that are totally free to share their tips and the things that they've learned and their failures and to be honest about it. And all they want is an opportunity to live free, raise their families in accordance with their values. Right? They're not here to impose or oppress anybody. They just want to be able to live free. That's it. And they are more than happy to come alongside and help you. We talk about all these things that the government tries to do to help people. It's like, my gosh, if they just realize that the real thing that builds communities is not a government program. The thing that builds communities is when neighbors actually take seriously the command to love your neighbor as yourself. And I find that in the homesteading community like nowhere else. It's incredible. Having said that, some of y'all are crazy. All right, now you know this is true. Think about your like little internal homesteading group of friends and whatnot. One of you's crazy. One of you's crazy. Some of you are thinking right now, which one is crazy, and you can't figure out who it is. It's you. You're the crazy one. All right, and sometimes, not every time, but sometimes that's the person that comes down to the Virginia General Assembly to help when we're carrying food freedom legislation. And sometimes, maybe someone I know, maybe someone who's a good friend of mine, maybe sometimes when I'm carrying a raw milk bill that I have worked for months on in order to get the necessary concessions, agreements, get everybody on board. I've got the homesteader community is like, all right, we're good with this. This works for us. You know, we were a little bit leery about some of the things they were trying to do, but we finally got it to a point. And then I get it past the subcommittee. Holy, like, you have no idea. I get it past the subcommittee. Now we're in full committee. We're in full committee, and I actually have the votes. I got the votes on you being able to legally buy raw milk in Virginia. And then some, whoa, don't clap yet. Don't clap yet. And then some, because this was in like 2017. So you know it doesn't end well, right? So I've got the votes and I have worked hard and I'm a relatively new legislator and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is pretty cool. And our side gets up to testify and one person admits to basically engaging in illegal activity. Because we had, no, you're not currently doing that, sir. You want to do that. Remember, let's get our dates in line here, all right? So you don't get escorted out of here. And, but we do pretty well. We do pretty well. And then the other side gets to get up and testify. And whenever it's raw milk, the Virginia Dairymen's Association gets up to oppose it. The Pediatric Association gets up to oppose it, right? And the reason why is because all of those, raw milk overdoses we've had in Virginia. No. So they get up to do it, and one person makes a comment about a particular incident that took place where somebody got sick. And my friend in the back of the room, who I love, wonderful human being, this is just too much for her to take. So she proceeds to yell at the back of a standing room only committee meeting at the chairman of the agricultural committee to proceed to tell him, in case he was wondering what her opinion was, how this was all lies and propaganda and distortions. And I'm sitting here at the podium, all right, and the chairman, like they're all sitting up on the dais. Chairman's is looking at me and he's got this look like, did that really just happen? I'm like, I don't know who that is. That's probably an insurgent. And so as she's yelling and screaming, I wasn't quite sure what she expected to happen. Like, was she expecting the chairman of the agricultural committee to be like, oh my gosh, ma'am, thank you so much for coming down to the Virginia General Assembly and screaming at this person that I've worked with for 15 years providing testimony. You know what? You're absolutely right. I'm so sorry. Let me take this bill right over to the governor's desk right now and have him just immediately sign it. We can just skip this whole legislative process and raw milk for everyone. Yeah, that's not what happened. I suddenly went from having the votes to not having the votes very, very quickly. And I remember we walked out of the committee room and she comes over. She's like, I'm so sorry. It's just this that was not true. And I'm like, yeah, this is Richmond. A lot of not true things get said. This is politics. And she goes, well, okay, so what do we do? I'm like, we do nothing. Well, no, we can bring it back. I can explain that not how this works. Not how this is done. For how long? At least a year. Because this is the Virginia General Assembly, and thank God we are not a full-time legislature. Because the last thing you want is politicians with nothing to do except write more stupid laws you have to contend with. We are a citizen legislature. We meet for 60 days out of the year on even years and 45 and odd unless the governor calls us in for special session. So what that means is if you don't get, when your bill has its shot between that subcommittee or that full committee, if it dies, try again next year. The saying we hear a lot is, delegate, thank you very much for all of your work, but the Commonwealth has survived for over 400 years without your legislation. I think it can survive for one more. So when we don't get it right, it costs us an entire year. And here's what I want you all to understand that you're up against. The argument against greater food freedom is always public safety. That's always it. Because after all, if the government, which has such a great track record of protecting all of us, isn't going through and inspecting every single product before somebody consumes it, they could hurt themselves, and so therefore we need this massive government bureaucracy in order to prevent that from happening. Now, we hear this, and we think that's absurd. Especially when we're talking about person-to-person sales. We're not talking about somebody slaughtering a cow, cutting it up, and then walking it down in a wheelbarrow to Safeway and selling it for general consumption across state lines. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, why can't I buy this from my neighbor? Well, it hasn't been inspected. Cool. I like it even more. Right? And their idea is, well, no, but you might get sick. To which, again, people like us usually look at that and be like, let me get this straight. It is legally easier for me to buy fentanyl than it is raw milk in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and you're supposed to be the arbiters of what's safe or not? But here's what I want to tell you. As obvious as all that is to us, it isn't going to win the argument in Richmond. It just isn't. And there's a lot of people I know, and it isn't just in this community, it's in every community, because I carry legislation on a variety of things, from life to taxes to regulatory policy to Second Amendment right. I carry it all. And every once in a while, I'll have somebody that wants to come down and help that hasn't come by my office yet and asked me, what's going on? What's the lay of the land? They just show up and they're going to give their passionate argument for why they believe what they believe. And a lot of times it ends up getting good bills killed. So what I want to do now is I want to talk a little bit about how do we correct for that. And the first thing to understand is this. The Schoolhouse Rock version in general, the process in Richmond is light years ahead of the process in Washington, D.C. We actually have rules and restrictions that are very appropriate. Like, for instance, in Virginia, we have one issue per bill. You don't get to have the Save the Puppies bill, which has $1 million for a casino. Like, you don't get to do that. That's a DC thing, it ain't a Richmond thing. We also tend to follow what they usually refer to as regular order, which is to say almost every single bill is going to be assigned to a committee. It's then going to be assigned to a subcommittee, and it's going to get a hearing. But here's what most people don't know. When you turn on the TV, if you're like super bored and having trouble sleeping, to watch the Virginia General Assembly, and you're watching the floor debate, I can tell you with 98% certainty what's going to happen to every single bill once it gets to the floor. Probably 100% certainty on most days. Because the real debate on a piece of legislation doesn't happen on the floor. The real debate happens in the subcommittee. It happens in the full committee. If you can get your bill out of subcommittee, 70-75% chance that bill is going to make it through at least whatever body it's in right now, House or Senate. Because that's the process we use to weed out the bills that have no chance of passing versus the ones that have an opportunity. And so here's what will happen a lot of times. Somebody will see a bill that they're very, very passionate about, and they'll say, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to email 100 delegates what I think about this bill. That doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything. Because the first person that a good legislative aide, the first question that a good legislative aide is going to ask is, are you the delegate's constituent? Are you the senator's constituent? If you're not, chances are that particular delegate or that particular senator is not necessarily interested in your opinion on a particular bill. If that delegate or senator doesn't sit on the subcommittee or the committee that's going to hear that bill, they might not even see it. So they're not thinking about it until it comes to the floor. And that's why they're going to tell you, thank you very much for your feedback. It is very appreciated. Should this bill come before the delegate or senator's attention, we would be happy to take your comments into consideration. Not saying you got to like it, just letting you know how it works. So what does this mean? It's actually a good thing. It means you don't got to worry about 100 delegates and 40 senators. You just got to worry about the delegates on that subcommittee. You just got to worry about the senators on that subcommittee. And the thing is you can go online right now, and if this is a bill having to do with food freedom, chances are it's going to the Agricultural Committee. So now once you start to understand, okay, this piece of legislation that I care about is going to go to this committee and this subcommittee. Now, instead of having to worry about 140 people, you got to worry about maybe 10. And that's when you pull your resources and you start flooding with phone calls and emails on that particular bill. Now, let me give you a little trick. If you call up during business hours in the General Assembly to talk about a particular bill, what did I tell you that really good legislative aide is going to ask you when you call? Are you a constituent? Now, if you leave a message, they don't get to ask that question. So if delegate or senator walks in the next morning and all of a sudden they've got 1,000 messages from people on this particular bill. Are you their constituent? They don't know, but they know they got a lot of interest in this particular piece of legislation. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you are going to leave that message, what information you leave and why you support a particular bill matters based off the delegate or the senator that you're talking about. I get thousands of calls or correspondence at times telling me how desperately people want us to ban firearms in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'm going to tell you right now, everyone in this room could call me and tell me, I want to ban firearms in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and it ain't going to change my vote. So, if you've got a delegate or a senator that no matter how much you call them, it isn't going to change their vote, why waste your time? Focus on the people that you have an opportunity of influencing. And then talk about the things that you think might be relevant to them, not just the things that are relevant to you. Now, you're probably asking yourself, how the heck am I supposed to figure all that out? Good news, you don't got to. You know why? Because I got to figure it out. And if it's one of my bills, I'm going to be able to tell you exactly how to frame that argument based off of who you're talking to. So please, when you see legislation that somebody's carrying that you support, work with that legislator on the sort of arguments that need to be made. If you decide that you're very passionate about this and you not only want to call or email the various members of that subcommittee, but you actually want to testify before subcommittee, which can also be very powerful, especially if you have a unique personal story. There's two ways that you can testify now. It used to be you had to show up in person. Now you can do it remotely. You can do it online. Now, we tend to give preference to the people that actually drive down to Richmond. That's fair. But I know as a subcommittee chair, I always try to make sure that everybody online also has an opportunity to testify. Now, here's the mistake some people make. Once again, going back to I think we've established, don't shout at the committee chairman, right? That's a baseline understanding. Please do not shout insults at members of the committee that are voting on the bill. You save that till after they voted. Anyway, secondly, I completely understand and sympathize that people that have been doing this for a long time, that are passionate about this issue, probably have a good 30 minutes of straight testimony they could provide without notes. You're going to get 60 seconds, right? And that's not because we're jerks. It's because in 60 days, we're going to hear 2,500 bills. And if everybody gets 30 minutes, we're never getting through them. So we allow people to come up and usually have 60 seconds. If you've got 6 people that you've came down to Richmond with to talk about this particular bill, and you all give the same 60-second speech, that's a waste, right? But if you come down there and you've got 5 or 6 people, and each one of you have worked out 2 or 3 points, or maybe you've got the 2 or 3 people that have 1 point that's significant. Perhaps it's the mother that's coming down there talking about the fact that their child has had horrible food allergies their entire life. And the one thing that actually provided some modicum of relief for them was being able to get fresh food and produce from their neighbor. And the idea, the audacity of any sort of government body that would tell a mother, you're not allowed to feed your kid that food unless it goes through our process, right? That's a powerful argument. Those are the arguments they need to hear. They don't need to just hear that this is about freedom. That is an argument that resonates with us. The first time I carried a raw milk bill, I had done nothing with the homesteading community. I'd never tasted raw milk. And somebody asked me, like, why are you doing this? I said, because it's garbage that the government tells you you can't. That's the only justification I need. The government's doing something. Well, I'm mad. But that's not the justification that most of the people sitting on that committee need. Now, let me ask you a question. On the Agricultural Committee, in the Virginia House of Delegates, 90% of the people the longest continuous serving legislative body in the Western Hemisphere with over 400 years, how many farmers do you think are on the Agricultural Committee? One. There's one member. So when and the reason why there's only one farmer is because there's only one farmer in the Virginia General Assembly. So when you sit there and you give your testimony on why you should be able to purchase raw milk, or why you should be able to buy a steak from your friend without the government's permission, and you get up there and you say this is about freedom, this is about the fact that the government should have any say in this matter with what I, as one free adult, decide to do with another free adult. I thought you guys were all into that. And then right after that, believe me, there's some interesting arguments I plan to use with identifying as someone that can buy meat without government authorization. Anyway. But then you get up there and you give that argument, and then right after you, 10 lobbyists get up from every single major agricultural industry in the Commonwealth that have been working with these delegates for years, sometimes decades. And they explain how this is a significant risk for public safety. It's a significant risk for the industry itself, because after all, if one person gets sick, there's going to be a news report. And after the news report goes out, all of a sudden people are going to stop buying that particular product at the stores. And this is going to have an adverse effect on farmers who are already facing an incredibly difficult marketplace. Now, if you're sitting there as a delegate on the Agricultural Committee and you have no personal experience with agriculture, except that you once drove by a farm, and now you're rendering a decision on this, are you listening to the three people that got up who seem very nice, or are you listening to all of the industry experts that just got up and told you if you do this and someone gets sick, it's going to be your fault? Keeping in mind that politics is a very risk-averse environment, they're going to take the safe vote. So the way that we change this is a couple of ways. First of all, on the grassroots level, more organization at the local level is essential. Right? You have this organization, which is national. You have other organizations which are local, countywide. Those are all powerful. They're good because they allow you to network. So that when I put out information about, hey, we're carrying this bill. And by the way, when I submit a bill, I don't want to just submit a bill and say, hey guys, this is what I'm doing. I want to work with you to figure out exactly what that bill should look like. Because I don't claim to be an expert in agriculture or homesteading. One look at my garden will demonstrate this. Except for my tomatoes. I rocked them this year. But anyway. So this is a partnership as we look at this legislative process. So many people in this room are subject matter experts with respect to the things that need to change in the code to make it easier for you to do exactly what you're already doing and want to continue and expand doing. The subject matter expertise I provide is I understand how the legislature works. I understand how grassroots activism works, and I want to be of service. But the thing that gets frustrating at times, right, and this is not me, again, there's things that I've done wrong before where I thought something sounded great and I should have done my due diligence in making sure that what sounded good on paper would work well in reality. But there's other times where I show up to that subcommittee and I think I've got everything worked out, and I think I've worked with everybody that I was working with to make sure that this was right. And then somebody shows up to testify in favor of my bill that I've never met before, never seen in my office before. And they will spend the 60 seconds they have giving testimony. They will spend 90% of it talking about the one thing in my bill they didn't really like and they wish we could change a little bit, and then 10% talking about, but other than that, it's an outstanding bill and we would love it. Again, keep in mind, risk-averse attitude. So what that delegate now hears when the person showing up to testify in favor of my bill has problems with it, they now get to vote no, not just to, let's say, not appease, but get along with all of the industry. They now get to vote no and say, oh, well, the person that testified on behalf of your bill said there were problems with it, so it's not ready yet. and they can take a very, very safe no vote. And then I walk out of there and I hear, so what do we do now? We wait a year. All right, so here's the good news. The good news is that I believe that with everything that happened during COVID, we have more people now than ever before in the Commonwealth that are willing to challenge the narrative constantly coming from certain sectors of the industry, from certain lobbyists, and from certain legislators, that what you guys do is unsafe or needs more regulation, or needs any regulation for that point. We have more people that are actually interested in getting good quality food and produce from their neighbor, and they don't see any reason to put a government inspection in between that transaction. So if we have more people than ever that are willing to do it, if we have more people than ever that are aware that some of the ways that we actually, let's say, process food in this country is actually detrimental to our health, then that's more people that have individual testimonies. That's more people that have practical examples. That's more people that can provide effective testimony in that subcommittee, and we need that. We need to be able to make an empirical appeal, a logical appeal, an economic appeal, and an emotional appeal. We need all of those things. And I know a little something about developing that. And I want to work with organizations like VICFA, with organizations like Homesteaders of America, to be able to make sure that we craft good legislation. And we know where we want to go, but we also know we're probably not going to get there tomorrow. So the idea is, what incremental steps can we take at the same time that we're taking the big shots, right? What incremental steps can we take to make it better, to make it easier? And as long as you want to fight for that, and as long as you want to go through this process, and as long as I'm in Richmond, I'll go through it with you. But that's what I need. I need the back and forth. I need your knowledge, I need your information, I need your stories. And then I want to offer my expertise with understanding a little bit about how this organization works that we call state government. I'll end with this, and then I want to take questions. How long have I been talking? Anybody keeping time? 30 minutes? Oh, dang, all right, perfect. So I got about 30 minutes for question and answer. The one thing I want to reiterate, and this is very important that I want everyone to understand. When it comes, I've already said this once before, I'm saying it again, when it comes to the philosophical argument for why you should be able to do all of this without government permission, I am already there. I am already there. Anybody here ever watch Parks and Recreation, Ron Swanson? That is my spirit animal, all right? The only reason I'm in elected office is to keep the government as far away from free people as humanly possible, right? So I want to work with you because, again, I think this is not only important from a philosophical perspective. I think it's not only important from a health perspective. It's not only important from just a food quality and safety perspective. When I look at what's going on in our country, and I described this once to somebody that had me on once to interview, I said, I see an identity crisis going on. I see a generation of Americans that are increasingly being told that they can't have any sort of pride about their past. And then they're gradually being separated from the things within their life right now that gives them meaning, their family, their church, their faith. And that's all being replaced with a vision of America that I don't recognize and I sure as heck didn't fight for. And the only way that's going to be stopped is enough people are willing to actually stand up and speak out against it. But not just speak out against it, they have to provide an alternative. If all we do is point to the lie without showing an alternative, we will lose, because I've seen it time and time again. People will hold on to a comforting lie before they will take a hard truth unless they see the hard truth working. And the thing that has given me so much hope, and that I am truly, please believe me, truly individually grateful for, is that once again, when I show up here, I will run into people that I have never met, that don't know me, that I don't know. And I see a common vision for how we want to raise our families, for the things that we value, for the things that we hold sacred. And it is so encouraging at times to realize you're just not alone, and that there is a whole lot more of us than the powers that be would like us to believe. So don't look at this as just a drudge through the legislation or the legislature or the politics. The most effective argument you are making for what you believe and what you do is not what you say in Richmond, it's what you actually do with your family in your own home. And developing those capabilities and building those stories and building those close relationships with your children, that is what is going to save the country, not a piece of legislation and not a politician. So I hope that was helpful. And if not, well, there's always next year. All right, so anybody have any questions for me about either legislation, the process? There's a microphone right behind you if you just want to go back there to ask your question. That way they can capture it on the video for those who are going to watch later.
Yeah, my question, I think you talked a little bit about, is emphasis on the community level. Does it help to gain momentum on a state or national level by really bringing in local politics, maybe, city councils or even local representatives? Does that help when you say, we are pushing on a local level to encourage stuff like that and have that backing?
Yeah, it does, because there's a very important statement. I think it was William F. Buckley Jr. that really popularized it. He said, politics is downstream from culture. Well, that means culture doesn't start in Richmond. Culture starts in the home and in the community. And so if you're fostering greater appreciation for, again, the homesteading, for the free food movement, if you're fostering greater appreciation for that at a local level, and you're getting more people of diverse backgrounds, because unfortunately right now, something like food freedom should not be a right or left issue. This should be something that, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, except maybe for a communist, right? You should appreciate that this is a positive thing. But again, unfortunately, when people have this view of how they get their food or how they get their medicine as either, I go to how does food made? At the grocery store. Right? Like, well, no, that's not how food is made. It's not how it's produced. It's not how it's raised. It's not how, anyway. So greater appreciation and understanding for that starts at the local level. And the more you build up that culture, the harder you make it for people in Richmond to pretend like this is just a small little group that doesn't really affect much or isn't very interested. And yeah, if you can start to become organized at the county level, where it's much easier to know who is who, and to be able to reach out to supervisors that are supervisor candidates that are going to show up to places like this, right, and actually support what it is that you're trying to do, that builds cultural momentum at the same time that you're building political momentum. Right? So when you show up to Richmond, if all of a sudden you have a culture behind you, plus a sympathetic story or sympathetic example behind you, it makes it far more likely that you're going to be able to get the legislation you want. So yeah, to answer your question, it's incredibly important, not to mention the fact that in many cases, not from an activist perspective, right? I want to emphasize this. Not everything has to be a town hall meeting. When people are constantly coming together in order to share, secrets or experiences or methods that they do a particular thing, and people are coming for that process of enjoying this new capability that you're imparting to them, that builds strong community. When all of a sudden some politician gets a bright idea that they're now going to make it illegal to do X, or they're going to require more regulation or require fees to do it, or when you're saying, if we were able to do this, we could really expand what we're doing. Now all of a sudden that community that didn't come together because of politics, they came together because of shared interest. That can be a very, very powerful force. Not to mention the fact that it's much easier to get people to consistently be a part of a community if it's adding value instead of just fostering rage. And that's one of the biggest problems that we have right now. Right? It's one of the big problems that we have kind of within more conservative circles. It's all like black pill, black pill, black pill. It's all, the world's falling apart. It all sucks. Like, no, getting married, having kids, homeschooling your kids or whatever you choose to do, raising them up, teaching them capabilities that are going to be valuable for them both socially, spiritually, emotionally, and professionally. This is all fun stuff to do. And we're going to have a great time doing it. That way, when everybody else doing the opposite is feeling depressed and isolated and not understanding why their life isn't working, and they look over and see, gosh, we're having a great time. It's like, what is different? So when I talk about the community activism, understand I don't just mean politics. I don't just mean legislator. I mean do the stuff that is fun together. And then when that source, that community is needed to engage in a political matter, they know exactly why they're doing it. And it isn't just because they're mad, it's because they're trying to protect something that they truly value. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for what you're doing. I've watched you in action quite a few times, and you're very inspiring.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if in Virginia there's anything that we can do, because the labels on the food that we're buying now is muddied significantly. There's been legislation that has been passed that allows them to really be ambiguous about where our food's coming from. The labels say distribution centers, and you can no longer read black and white what it is. So is there something, and I know that Florida's kind of doing their own thing. There's some good stuff coming out of their legislation and the laws that they're changing. I'm wondering, because we have such a small window of opportunity in Virginia, having the 2 out of the 3 ranches on our side, if there's any way that we can make a difference in what we deal with here in Virginia.
So on the labeling, there's part of the problem has been you'll hear U.S. beef, and it's not. Like it was raised somewhere else, and then it came here, and then because it entered the United States right before it entered your mouth, all of a sudden it's U.S. raised beef, right? And that's been a problem at the federal level. Right. Part of the difficulty, and this is a huge reason why federalism was supposed to be the order of the day with respect to the way that things operate in the United States. It was supposed to be that the federal government stayed within Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which if you read is a very limited enumerated set of powers. And yet, that isn't what the federal government is doing. But here's the trick that they get around it. This is why I constantly say if you wanted to get rid of 2 amendments in the Constitution, it would be the 16th and the 17th. 16th is the federal income tax, and 17th is the popular election of senators as opposed to the state legislative elected of senators.
Yes.
And the reason for that, and I know this is kind of a long roundabout answer, but I want to make sure people understand the context, right? Because the federal government can now tax you directly as an individual, which it couldn't do until the early 20th century, they now get to extort states with your money. Because they don't say, no, you have to do it this way. What they say is, oh, you don't want to get on board with the federal program? I guess we'll just pull the certification for your USDA-approved processing centers. And since nobody wants that to happen, the states capitulate. And we've seen that up in Maine was a good example of this. Maine came up with a very, I thought, reasonable bill that allowed for a local option. And the feds came in almost immediately and told the governor, if you don't veto that, we're pulling processing plants out of Maine. And you can imagine what every single cattleman, what everybody else did that was selling in interstate. They're like, we can't afford to lose this. Okay, I guess we'll capitulate. And that's tough. And that's what gives them the power to do that. So with labeling, there's things that we can try. There's things that we can try within state, and sometimes states do get away with this. It just kind of depends on what the mood is with the federal regulators and with Congress. But you can get in for, and we've seen this before, there was actually a movement a while back, and there still is. The Farm Bureau has actually put as one of their requirements is they don't want you to be able to call it almond milk because it ain't milk if it doesn't. Because it turns out almonds don't lactate no matter how they identify. Very bigoted toward almonds and all the other nuts producing milk right now, but it is what it is. Yeah. So there is efforts going on to try to get greater truth in labeling in order to provide people transparency with respect to no kidding, where did this come from? But there is a lot of fight in Congress, and again, I want to clarify this too, because obviously I think most people in here know what political party I belong to. This is an issue where I just am mad at all of them. Right? Like there's nothing so bipartisan as stupidity, and it happens all the time. So I want to make sure people understand that when I'm talking about this, I'm not talking about this from a partisan standpoint. I'm talking about it from a desire for more freedom. So I can say yes, there can be attempts made at a state level. The nature of the federal pushback will probably look like what they did in places like Maine.
Thank you.
So, you see the news, it's all gloom and doom, and I was wondering what for someone young as myself right now, I could leave my job and get into politics or different things, and what hope would you give me, to keep fighting and not just sit around doing nothing for this country?
So I was on Sebastian Gorka's show a while back, and he asked me, he goes, Nick, can we win this? Can we win this thing? Can we turn it all around? And I said, to be honest and respectfully, Doc, I'm getting tired of hearing the question phrased that way. The way you phrased it is much better. I'm not saying the question of whether or not we can win or turn it all around is important or not. It is important. I understand. It just shouldn't be the most important question, and it shouldn't be the first one you ask. Let me ask you all a question right now. If you knew that the probability of us winning or turning it around was almost zero, would you stop fighting? Would you stop fighting? That's what they need to know. At the end of the day, that's what they need to know. They need to know no matter what they do, no matter how much pressure, no matter how much comfort they try to take away, no matter if they try to deplatform you, if they take your job, if they put you in jail, no matter what they do, you're not stopping. And to answer your question, the reason why you're not is because what we believe in is true, and it's beautiful, and it's noble, and because a lot of people died to make sure we could have it. I'm not going to tell the children of friends that I lost in combat, I didn't do absolutely everything I could to make sure that their kids grew up in a country worthy of the sacrifice that they gave. I'm not doing it. And I want them to know I'm not doing it. I want them to know I'm coming back no matter what they do. Because when people have that mindset, one of two things happen. Either they win or their children do. David wanted to build the temple. And when he first said, I'm going to build the temple, the prophet, I think it was Nathan, said, go forth and do it. God is with you. And then Nathan comes back from message God telling David, you don't get to build the temple. Your son will. But if David hadn't done his job, then Solomon would have had to. There's a reason why I believe there is this cultural push away from marriage, genuine marriage, and raising children. It's because a man and a woman in a healthy, God-fearing marriage with children that they are responsible for don't wonder what they're fighting for. It can't so easily be taken away by a narrative. They know what they're fighting for because they tuck it in at night. That is a people that are very, very difficult to defeat or control. And so the hope that I would give you is this. One, I'm a man of faith. I'm a Christian. I know what happens in the end. We win, right? Because Christ already did the heavy lifting. All that he asked me to do is be obedient. I'm not responsible for victory. I'm responsible to be obedient to the purpose he has set before me. I'm not to go out and say, hey, God, I'm going to do this, join me. I'm to go out and say, God, what are you doing so I can join you? And that may sound cliche, especially for someone that doesn't follow my faith, but let me just tell you right now, it provides a great deal of objective truth, morality, and certainty with respect to my purpose. I don't have an identity crisis no matter what happens because I know who I am, because I know who made me. And so when you know those things, and then you find somebody else who knows those things, and you start to build a life together, I can tell you this. I've been married for almost 25 years now. We've been poor, we've been doing pretty well. We've had ups, we've had lows. I've never questioned my identity, I've never questioned my purpose. And as you have kids, it becomes more certain. So start doing the things. Start doing the things that you were created to do and take joy in them. Again, it's not all drudgery. It's actually a lot more joy. And ultimately what will happen, and this is the part that is just so important, right? There's a scripture, oh gosh, I just forgot the address. I think it's in Ephesians, where it talks about the peace which surpasses all understanding. Notice it is not the peace that is incredibly evident because you're wealthy and happy and secure. It's the peace which surpasses all understanding, which means that around you is chaos. And yet for some reason it doesn't faze you. So I can tell you, if you're building your life first and foremost off of your faith, and then off of your family, and then you're developing the sort of spiritual, intellectual, emotional, and physical competency to be able to protect and provide for that family, and to protect and provide for each other, and then to extend that out to your community, your church family. That's a life that no matter what happens is incredibly well lived. And if you are living, I'll leave it with this. This is the hope, because this is something that you control and that nobody can take away from you, no matter what. If you live your life in a way where you are more concerned about what God says when you arrive than what man says when you are gone, you will never regret that. All right. Sermon complete. No. Any more questions for me? I know there's a lot of other far more interesting people to get to. I always fanboy when I come here. But if there are any other questions, I'll be happy to take them. I think we got a couple more minutes. What time is it? 10 till? All right, we got some more. Yes, sir. All right.
I've been recently exited California. But the trouble I see is that Virginia looks like California did 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. I come from a state that not once, but twice, by the people, for the people, voted down same-sex marriage. How do we as a nation, as a state, local government that you're in, stop corruption? How do we regain our voice as we the people?
It's an excellent question. It's one I get a lot. All right, I'm going to let you in on a secret as long as none of you tell any of my constituents. I was born and raised in California. There are two types of people that leave California: locusts and refugees. Refugees leave and know why they left and are very happy for where they're at right now. Locusts destroy the wealth and then go somewhere else and continue to destroy it, right? I will tell you this, some of your greatest political allies are refugees. Refugees from other states where they saw exactly what happened and they can see the trend lines going in a particular direction. There are a lot of things that, once again, the reason why the Supreme Court was able to get away with various decisions that they've made throughout time is because they believed that they had the force of culture behind them. And because you had Supreme Court justices that didn't actually believe that their job was to interpret law, but rather to interpret into law whatever their preferred political positions were. Now, I will say this. I take a very liberty-based approach to legislation and the role of government, which means there are times where people come up to me and like, why would you allow that? Or why would you allow this? And I always say this: I will never vote yes on anything which violates my conscience or violates my faith. By the same token, there's a lot of things that I believe that will say conservatives, maybe Christians, maybe Orthodox Jews, Muslims, people which have a faith structure which informs their world, have relied upon government to protect those things. I believe government has a specific role to play, and primarily that role is to protect your individual liberty, to protect your property rights, to, when necessary and appropriate, keep you safe from either foreign intervention or domestic criminals. But other than that, I usually side with the idea that you are free to do what you want, provided you don't infringe on the rights and liberties of someone else to do the same. And whenever the issue of marriage came up with me, I always said the biggest problem with marriage is when we handed it over to Caesar and said, you get to decide. If you have a view of marriage, or a biblical view of marriage, and I do, the best way I defend it is how I actually conduct my own. I personally don't think the government should be in charge of defining what marriage looks like. I just don't. Because I think rendering things to Caesar usually ends up with a very Caesar-like response. And again, going back to the question before on what can we actually do about it as an individual? Well, what are we doing within our, if we have a particular belief, maybe it's on marriage, maybe it's on life, maybe it's on a number of issues. The first and foremost, what we need to make sure is what is being taught and raised within our own families? What is being taught and raised within our own voluntary communities? What is being taught and raised from the pulpit? Because if we don't have unity of message and unity of purpose there, why would we ever expect that we're going to have unity of message or purpose within government? I would far rather a government so small that its decisions on these core issues are insignificant compared to that of the church or that of the people than that of politicians. We know they're going to get it wrong. And I think what's happening right now, and again, this goes back to the cultural narrative. Every culturally shaping institution that we have within this country now, whether it's media, whether it's academia, whether it's the public school system, whether it's Hollywood, the arts and entertainment, music, I'm sorry, it is not on our side. Okay, so what do you do about that? Well, in those industries or in those places where it's competitive, like politics, we engage. In those areas where it's not competitive, we disengage and we set up alternatives. Right? I'm not sending my kid, personally, I'm not telling anybody what to do. I'm not sending my kid to a university that is going to teach them to hate me, hate their faith, hate their country, and then give them a degree that won't even pay for itself. Why would I do this? But if they're not going to do that, and that's been the tradition for decades, then what's the alternative? Well, the alternative is I help raise them with different capabilities that gives them more control over their life. I actually teach them about entrepreneurship. I actually teach them about the necessary things that they need to do to make sure that they can provide for themselves and their families. And that's actually a fun process. Coming here is a part of that process. And so that's why I say, look for the things that you can do that you actually have the most control of. The tendency right now, and what politicians love, is when what you believe is that the most you can do is vote or give them money for their campaigns. Now, I'm not saying voting's not important. I'm not saying political donations aren't important, but is it the most important thing that you can do? No, the most important thing that you can do are the things that you actually have maximum control over. They also happen to, again, they also happen to be the most relevant, the most fun, the most purposeful. So focus on that first and build those things up. Because I will tell you right now, if you raise your kids with a sound worldview, and I don't just mean telling them what to think, I mean actually explaining, using critical thought. God gave it to us for a reason. It's His, it's not theirs, it's His. And we actually use that, and they feel confident within their faith, within their values, within what they believe. If they feel confident in their ability to effectively and articulately, excuse me, well, that's great. It's always nice when you screw up articulation when you're talking about being articulate. But if they can articulate it in a way that makes them feel confident about it, you will be just blessed to see how that manifests itself in their interactions and their own decision-making process. I'm not worried about how my kids are going to confront a lot of these issues. I may be worried about the price they may have to pay at certain things for believing what they believe, but man, I'm not worried that they know why they believe it. And that's how you protect future generations. So fight on the political front, fight on these other ones, but never forget the first things, because I think that's part of the problem of what we did. I think starting in the early 20th century, and I can walk you back to the entire history, individuals, the church, everyone else, they started to have this idea that the government was now responsible for things that it never was responsible before. And the end result is government has an insatiable lust for power, and it will continue to expand as far as it possibly can until it is made to stop. But the only people that are going to be equipped to stop it are the ones that are not dependent upon it. So first and foremost, make sure you're not raising kids that feel dependent and helpless and hopeless before it. Otherwise, they'll be subjugated by it and they'll be happy to do it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
One more, that'd be great. I want to bring us full circle back to where we started here today, discussing raw milk and backyard chickens. For instance, down the road in Stevens City, just 15 minutes, you can't have a backyard chicken because it's not safe because they poop, but so do our dogs. I don't get it. You talked about government being the problem, and to an extent, I do agree, but I want to pose something to you that I'll end in a question, because I think that's only partially correct. Mm-hmm. I think government, I think the legislatures that support these bills or are afraid to go against the things that this group would find beneficial are afraid to do so because we're only fighting part of the battle. And to use our military vernacular, we're not focused on the right center of gravity. The right center of gravity is the corporate interests and the corporate money that backs that and the venalities that they hold on to, such as shareholder value, their market share for chicken sales and everything else that this stuff could threaten. But we don't talk about that. So as we look forward to moving these bills forward, as we look forward to helping you help us, and vice versa, how do we combat the corporate interest that is overwhelming every aspect of our society to where we have no voice because they have found a voice in government and they have found a lot of lawyers and a lot of money and a lot of other things to tap into that to make it do what they want, which is not in our interest. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
No, it's a great question. Because it's a great question and it's a complex answer, because here's always the question. What sort of laws would you potentially pass to prevent that sort of, we'll say, interference into politics? Because the moment you pass it in such a way where you say, okay, let's say a corporation can't donate to a political campaign. So they did this with our federal legislature. Has it worked? No, because there's a million different ways to be able to give and to be able to get around that process. I will say that the long-term answer, I'm going to get to some short-term ones too, but the long-term answer is, again, you have to raise a generation that doesn't have this attitude that, well, the problem is there's too much money in politics. No, the problem is that the government has too much control over how money's spent. The reason why, Microsoft didn't have a single lobbyist until I think the early 90s. You know why? There was no regulations on what they were doing. And then all of a sudden, some politician got the bright idea that maybe we pass some antitrust laws against Microsoft. Next thing you know, Microsoft is spending millions of dollars a year on lobbyists and political campaigns. The government was never meant to have this much control and power over the economy. Never, especially not the federal government. But if we don't raise a generation that actually believes that and actually pushes back against this narrative that the government's just there to make sure that we have better equal redistribution, well, then this is all just going to be an argument about, well, does this person have too much influence or does this person have too much influence? And we just bounce back and forth between who happens to have more influence at any given time. And that's not what we want. That's the long-term solution. The short-term solution is you look at some of these entities and what they do and how they do it. And there has been a much bigger push to try to expose, specifically within agriculture, the powerful interests and the lobbying interests that then manipulate regulations in the name of public safety to actually engage in what we call regulatory capture, which is nothing more than we're going to set up barriers to entry so you can't compete with us. But again, part of that is an educational standpoint. Part of that is about, once again, people understand the difference. And I actually think that part is one where you actually have the sort of good kind of bipartisan support, where you have people that are arriving at the same conclusion, maybe for very different reasons. But they're both fed up with this idea that this particular entity or set of entities have so much power over how the regulations are written that they can essentially steamroll anybody else. But the way that you actually do that is through greater local organization. It's through, Joel Salatin has been one of the best at doing this with respect to the testimony that he's provided and with the work that he's done in popularizing this stuff. Right? I don't know if you've ever seen the documentary Food Inc. I don't know if you agree with all of it or you like some of it, you don't like other things in it. right? I always tell people this. My goal is not to tell somebody you're not allowed to have 1,000 acres of a particular crop. If you want to do monoculture, you can do monoculture. My job as the government is not to tell you you can't do that. I will step in and tell you you are not allowed to then write regulations to prevent competition from everybody else that wants to do it differently. And that general fairness argument is one that tends to resonate a whole lot better than, say, trying to prevent corporate donations. Because what we find is that, okay, you prevented this corporate donation. So what do? Well, they fund it all into a PAC, which then does that. Okay, well, we're going to get rid of the PACs. Okay, we won't call it a political action committee. We'll call it a citizens alliance committee. Okay, great, we'll fund it on that. Money's always going to follow in politics as long as politicians have this much control over the economy. So step one is, long-term, raise a culture that is no longer trusts that politicians should have that kind of control. Step two is that when you're actually doing your advocacy, make sure that you're going after the things that actually provide a long-term argument. That's where I talk about the incrementalism, right? So we wanted raw milk in Virginia. We couldn't get it. What did we do? Herd shares. What was the argument made for herd shares? The argument was, are you honestly going to tell a person that they don't have a right to the produce or the product of their own livestock? Well, no, we can't get away with that. Okay, herd shares was born. So what is that? It's not exactly what we wanted, but it is an alternative to the system that we were given. And constantly looking for creative ways to create those alternatives, especially when unique opportunities present themselves. Again, right after COVID was an incredibly unique opportunity. If we actually have a legislature where we can get the bills all the way through, that's an incredible opportunity. And that's when we actually have to show up with the best arguments and really highlight the problem that you just mentioned. It's like, wait a second. Here's the empirical data. You don't get to tell me that the reason why you oppose this is because it's public safety. You're opposing this because you think it's competition to your entry into the marketplace. That is an unfair use of government. You don't get to use the government to shut out your competition. And if you have enough people showing up with the right arguments, and this is why the cultural argumentation is so important as well. Because now all of a sudden when you call up your friend and you say, hey, you know that community group that we have in our county where we do X, Y, and Z? Hey, can you contact these 7 delegates? Send them this email. They'll do it now. And you get that overwhelming support where all of a sudden you get those members and let's just say out of 10, 20% of them are going to vote against you no matter what you do. They don't care. They don't agree. That's it. They're going to vote against. And 20% are going to vote with you no matter what. All right, so now we're left with 60%. So we concentrate all of our efforts on what do those people need in order to shift and then once you get it passed, there's been no legislation to try to get rid of herd shares after it started. Why not? Doesn't raw milk kill everybody? That's a big part of what you do. Once you get some concession, and this is the big part too that the food freedom movement needs to understand. If you can get a compromise that is not what you want, but allows you to destroy the narrative that this is dangerous, you're in a much better position in the future to be able to get something more significant. But if you don't establish that groundwork first, and you just try to, we will take all or nothing, okay, you are fighting a monster that is much bigger and much more financed than you are. So part of this is chipping away at the weak points and being able to build a narrative which you can then build a larger argument from to achieve your end state. Does that answer your question, sir? Okay, all right. Once again, hey, thank you all very much for being here. Thank you for what you do. I'm gonna leave before you all fall asleep, but again, thank you very much, and just remember, tread around and find out.